somebody who cannot cater for the basic needs of their family is really in the most chronic form of poverty, and that is the most urgent need that we need to satisfy in the world today, and help people generate their own resources and find work that will enable them to cater for their families. There are real challenges in terms of the how committed and how dedicated governments in developing countries are to helping their own people. The systems which determine a lot about the way their welfare and their economic position are very opaque. They don't have full knowledge about what decisions are being made, who's making them, and they have very few ways in which they can demand that their governments, for example, both at the local level, people immediately, those powerful people at the local level or even at the national level, they have very few channels in which to really influence those decisions. And I think the real root is that these people are disempowered. These people lack knowledge about the processes that really have a significant outcome on their lives. And until we can really give those people a voice and empower them to stand up for themselves, and really have a say in what happens in their country, they might struggle. And it's not a yes or no answer. It's some governments are more committed to those ideals than others, and they all help. They're all engaged in some way in tackling the problems of development. But there's a lot more that those governments could do if they were to really think about, to put the needs of their people in the forefront of their mind, and using their positions to enrich themselves and to benefit their businesses and to benefit their own networks of supporters and power brokers. They could be looking much more widely at the needs of society and doing more to help them. I think the war on global poverty is a very long one. In terms of responding to the question about why aid that governments provide, that NGOs provide, isn't more effective in supporting communities to progress and provide basic needs for themselves, I would say that one of the biggest challenges is actually being able to address the real needs that people face, being able to understand the needs that a community faces, and being able to intervene in ways that really empower people and respond to the challenges they face. I think we all underestimate how difficult it is to understand the needs of a community in far-flung places, and to go in there and with the objective of trying to help them. And I think we need to be much cleverer and much more and engage much more closely with the people we're trying to help, to understand their challenges and problems. And I think in that way we'll be able to provide support and interventions that will be able to help them more effectively, especially over the long term. So I think that's a serious problem. I read a book recently about an NGO in Bangladesh, and most of its staff were Bangladeshi and had family living in the villages, but they were mostly urban people. And when they got to these villages, they realised that they did not understand the challenges that people faced. They did not understand what type of work they could do that could really help people. And what they had to go through was an intensive learning process. So we're talking about Bangladeshi people helping Bangladeshi people. And yet, because they lived in such different environments, they still struggled to understand how best they could help these people. All the more so for Western NGOs, donors, thinking about intervening in countries in the developing world. We have to appreciate how challenging it is for us to adapt what we're doing to the needs that people face, and to really be open to learning about and engaging with the communities that we're trying to help. I've heard somebody describe aid as gesture politics. That by giving money to these countries, you can distract and sort of pretend that the other issues aren't aren't important. So a country can say, well, we're giving lots of aid, we're helping development, whereas in fact, some of the biggest challenges are arguably outside of aid. So trade, economic relations, even foreign policy, the way our foreign policy affects poor countries. I think it's because aid is easier to give. That, and at the end of the day, developed countries benefit from aid. A lot of them tie their aid, i.e. the US. If you get US aid, you have to buy US goods and services. So the money just goes back into the US economy. And also governments use aid to buy the support of countries. So in many respects, aid is easy. Trade, economic relations, foreign policy, that's very, very difficult. And there isn't the political will to address a lot of those issues. That the global economy and the global trade system and economic institutions work in ways that sort of do entrench the marginalisation of poor countries. So the international trade system, the rules have been set up by Western countries in ways which benefit them much more than poor countries, and encourage and really sort of, in some respects, entrench that dynamic of marginalisation of these countries in the global economy. So, for example, the rules have been set up so that it's okay for Western farmers to be subsidised and then to dump their produce on developing countries. But poor countries cannot, protect themselves by putting in place certain types of protection, tariff barriers, etc., and subsidise their own farmers. The rules have been set in a very specific way that allow developed countries to carry on doing the things that they want to do, but really restricting the ability of poor countries to protect their own markets while they develop them. And then in terms of the economic system, the IMF and the World Bank have an enormous amount of control over poor countries and dictate to them how they should implement their economic policies, many of which there has been a lot of analysis to show that really sort of harm developing countries rather than support them. There's a whole range of factors, and it's a very complex picture. I'm middle class, I've grown up in a middle class community, I've had access to very good education, and that's really given me lots of opportunities in life, and allowed me to get where I've got today. And I've had a supportive family that's had the resources to be able to provide that education for me. I think the real problem, so it's really hard for me to see outside of that community, which is obviously one where poverty is sort of not very evident. But I am aware that there are plenty of people out there who, during the course of their lives, have not had access to the same level of education, the same level of support. Maybe it's because the family haven't been wealthy enough to find the best school for them, and to give them as much support as they could if they had more resources to be able to do that. Maybe there are family problems that have meant that parents haven't been able to support their children as they would like, and maybe the parents just aren't responsible enough to really support their kids, and actually maybe they don't, going back generations, they haven't had those opportunities, they don't appreciate how important they are, and then unfortunately that generation finds themselves in a position where they've not had the best education they could. They might have, the family environment in which they've lived might not help them to sort of get on with their life in the best possible way, and they do struggle, and they don't have as much opportunity available to them as perhaps someone like myself, who's been fortunate, probably more fortunate than most. So I think it then becomes much more of a struggle for those people over the long term. So I think there's serious problems. Our schooling system isn't as good as it could be. Especially at the moment, there's lots of unemployment, and that is obviously, leading to people struggling and in debt, and without ways to really live the life that they want to. So there's serious problem. I think the real key is social and economic problems can have their roots sort of way back in time, and if a particular generation has suffered from economic deprivation, has had social problems, you cannot turn those problems around overnight, and it can take a couple of decades of investment in trying to support those parts of society to see things in a different way, to access the best education opportunities, to have the best support possible to help them move on. And I think you can't turn these problems around overnight. But at the same time, I think some of the same problems exist here in the UK as you have in developing countries, that you have inequality, you have rules and systems in place which make it much more difficult to help people who struggle to become empowered and given more opportunity. And I think we need to tackle those as well. The hypocrisy around the way the financial system functions is enormous. I mean, I'm still astounded at the fact that you can have a bank account in Switzerland that's completely anonymous, and nobody has any oversight of it, and can be used to channel money made from the most corrupt and illegal activities, and yet nobody can then go there and access information about who that money belongs to, where it's come from. The financial system is so opaque, and all these tax havens and banking havens are really a significant part of the problem, because they allow money from the developing world, which could be supporting development, to leak out through corrupt activities, tax evasion, and be deposited in our own countries, ultimately benefiting us. And the system is so untransparent that it's hard to do anything about it. So incredible hypocrisy. Yeah. Corruption isn't just about developing country governments; it's about the way our institutions and political systems work as well. There is grounds for optimism. 50 years ago, you had a number of countries across Asia that were very, very poor. Korea, Taiwan, Japan, Hong Kong. Well, Hong Kong's just a small sort of island peninsula, but these were regions that were very, very poor. India, China. But if you look today at what they're achieving and what they've achieved over the last 50 years, they've been able, in different ways, to progress and to really help their people out of poverty. And what we see in China is more people have been lifted out of poverty than any other country in the last 50 years, and they've arguably achieved something which is historically unprecedented. Now, in some respects, those countries are quite unique. They've had very unique environments in which that has happened, but there's obviously things to be learnt from them, and if they can do it, then obviously it means it is possible for other countries to do it. But in some respects, a lot of the other developing countries have different challenges and much more complex political systems and much more multi-ethnic societies with their own tensions. And arguably the economic system in the world today is a little bit more restrictive for developing countries, so that poses its own challenges. But the fact that those countries have been able to achieve so much in the last 50 years and make poverty history in some respects, Japan was a peasant society 60 years ago. It is now one of the most powerful countries in the world. I mean, it's extraordinary. The fact that they've been able to do it suggests that it is possible. There's lots of different elements that have gone into that, and we need to learn from those and see if we can make those those elements sort of count in the other developing countries that are struggling today.